Hey, what's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome into my wide receiver start sit analysis for week 14 of the NFL season. Playoffs are here for a majority of you, or some of you are getting ready to wrap up your regular season and head into the playoffs, whatever it may be. A lot of very, very important decisions to make this week, especially at a position so crowded like the wide receiver position. So we're going to talk about all the matchups this week and who you should be putting into your lineup. As always, though, we got to take a look back at last week and see how we did. Not a great week last week. Taking a look at the percentage, 67% last week. Definitely not a great percentage. We got to come back from that, right, though. We got to get higher than 67%. And for a majority of the year, we've been over that. We've been in the 70s for quite a bit this season. We've had an 80% week. So we got to get back to those 70s. And of course, my goal is every single week to try and be a lot closer than 80. We had some guys perform last week that just kind of came out of nowhere. They jumped up into the rankings. They did very well, but we got to pinpoint those guys this week and get ready for a better week. So let's jump into it, and we'll start with our Thursday night matchup. First up this week on Thursday Night Football, New England and the Los Angeles Rams. And at least one of these teams in this matchup has an excellent opportunity to put up some fantasy points at the wide receiver position. There's only one team, though. For New England, Cam last week against the Chargers only threw for 69 yards. What are you going to expect against the defense that allows the least fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers this season? Are we expecting a whole lot more? Well, I'm expecting them to throw more, but I don't know how much more upside I would be expecting. He's not going to throw for 69 yards again, but you never know. The passing offense there in New England just isn't what it used to be. The name of the game right now, run the football, play good defense, and try to win games by controlling the clock. So for me, on the side of New England, I'm not starting any of these wide receivers this week. There's just not nearly enough upside, and this defense is way too good to be risking it with any of the guys that they have there healthy right now. For the LA Rams, though, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, we are going to continue to play these two guys. Now, on a weekly basis, I still continue to see the questions. What about Coop? What about Kupp? Or what about Kupp? What about Woods? Which one are we going with? It's both of them still. And yes, maybe some of the upside is limited on a weekly basis for whatever reason, but they continue to combine for an upwards of 20 targets a game, these two. They're the number one and number two in this offense. They're the guys that are getting the majority of the targets. They're the guys that are getting the big plays. The tight ends haven't been doing a whole lot. The running game's been a little bit better, and maybe the running game being better will help these two be, have a little bit higher ceiling down the stretch. So we're going to continue to play Kupp and going to continue to play Woods at this point. Now, they're going to continue to switch back and forth on who's going to have big games and who's not going to have big games, but they both have safe enough floors you can roll them both out there. Denver and Carolina, and the Denver offense looks a whole lot better when they have, a quarterback that's actually started a game in the last 5 years. But Drew Lock back at the helm last week. Yeah, offense looked a little bit better, but they have a chance to take another step forward this week against Carolina, because over the last 4 weeks, Carolina has allowed 45 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, the second most in the NFL. So over the last several weeks, that defense has not looked nearly as good as it did earlier in the season. So because of that, I mentioned it in my waiver wire video for quarterbacks. If you want to stream Drew Lock this week, it could potentially work out well for you. And that's why I've got Jerry Jeudy and Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick both listed as starts this week. I think both of them can be fantasy viable. Maybe the floor, maybe the ceiling isn't that high like it's been all season. None of us have been starting Jerry Jeudy or Tim Patrick hoping that we get 30, 40 fantasy points per game. We're not starting them hoping for them to be a wide receiver 1. We're starting them expecting, wide receiver 3 type production. We can plug them into our lineup and get decent numbers from them. And I think that, again, this week, that is what you're going to get. Carolina's a little bit messy right now, and this is something we're going to have to monitor throughout the week, because coming out of their bye week, they've had quite a few positive tests for COVID, and they had to shut down the facility. As of this recording, I don't know exactly what's going to happen right now. That's why we have to keep monitoring it. But both DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel both tested positive and placed on the COVID list. Now for DJ Moore, not only is he dealing with that with Curtis Samuel, but he's also dealing with an ankle injury that may or may not hamper him this week. There was talks that he could end up being ready to go, but that is not set in stone either. So now DJ Moore has a couple of different factors working against him. Oddly enough, Robbie Anderson is fine as of this recording. So obviously, if those two guys were to miss, then we got to go with Robbie Anderson. But this could greatly change throughout the week because if either of these guys end up coming off the COVID list or they end up being healthy, if there's no DJ Moore, but there's an Anderson and a Samuel, then we start Samuel. If they're all three healthy, then we start all three. We're just going to have to keep an eye on it. So make sure that you tune in later in the week for my wide receiver rankings video because we'll probably touch base on that a little bit more at that time. Houston and Chicago is going to lead us down another road of impending questions that we're going to have to answer this week, largely based around Brandin Cooks, who was potentially being evaluated for a concussion after their game this past weekend. So is he going to end up being okay? Is he going to end up making it through? Will he be back? Is he going to be put in the protocol? Again, something we will have to monitor throughout the week. If for some reason he is out of the protocol, isn't put in it, whatever it may be, he's going to be a start for me. Keke Coutee, as of right now, will also end up being a start. I mean, that was a huge, large volume day, and I expect the same thing this coming week as well. I mean, he had the second most yards in all of football last week, and I don't think a whole lot of people saw that coming. Now, we've always been fans of Keke, do you love me, Coutee, but to see that type of a day, I didn't see it either, but we knew the targets were going to be there. And I mentioned it in my videos last week that maybe the ceiling wouldn't be very high, but we knew a bunch of targets would be coming because there would be no Will Fuller. Well, the ceiling was a lot higher than I expected. And it could be another, again, safe floor this week, but it's going to be the Chicago Bears defense, a very tough defense. Now, Chad Hansen for Houston last week, great week, but a lot of it is going to depend on whether or not Cooks will end up being ready. So, but the Bears are going to be ready. They're not going to get caught off guard. Hansen isn't going to come out of nowhere like he did last week. They'll be ready to go. But Skrine, the slot corner for Chicago, he has an opportunity to mess up quite a bit. He tends to do that, let some big plays, cause some penalties. He's not the best slot corner in the league. He does give up some plays, and he has some issues on a game-by-game basis. So whoever plays in the slot this week, possibly Chad Hansen, possibly a little bit of Coutee, could end up having a good matchup with him. For Chicago, Allen Robinson will continue to be a start, and we're going to put Darnell Mooney as a start this week as well. Just a Houston and Chicago game has the potential to have a lot of back and forth, a lot of throwing of the ball. Darnell Mooney does have at least 6 targets in 5 of his last 6 games, so he's seeing a decent amount of volume. And going up against Houston this week, keep in mind, Houston just lost their top corner. Okay, Bradley Roby is done now. Houston just lost their top corner. Moving forward, it's probably going to be Hargraves that's going to end up being the guy that is going to face off with one of these 2 players. So there's a lot of opportunity here for Chicago to bounce back. There's a lot of opportunity for Allen Robinson to end up having a big game. There's a lot of opportunity for Darnell Mooney to have a big game. No Bradley Roby means lots of upside for both of these players. The Dallas passing game has looked a lot better recently with Andy Dalton at quarterback. Yes, there were concerns, obviously, with Dak Prescott going down with the injury. And to begin with, it was a little bit of a bumpy road. But Dalton is finding his receivers. And we're seeing at this point that the wide receivers for Dallas, we're not really bumping them down at all. Now, Dallas is not playing that well. The defense is getting burned. There are some costly turnovers. Zeke hasn't been that great. The offensive line has struggled. All those things combined, Dallas isn't looking good. But from a fantasy standpoint, the wide receivers are still producing on a weekly basis. Now, Michael Gallup, it would be nice to start him, but he's just been too inconsistent and too up and down. It does feel like Andy Dalton's looking his way a bit more, so maybe another decent performance from him would mean that we do need to start all 3 of these guys again moving forward. But Amari Cooper continues to be the alpha in that offense. He's the number 1 wide receiver. He's still top 20 in targets, receptions, and yards on the season among wide receivers. So he's getting a decent amount of volume. He's got touchdowns in back-to-back games finally. The touchdowns of what have kind of been missing in terms of making him a top fantasy wide receiver, a wide receiver 1 all season long. But the one thing is, he's been far more consistent this season than he has been in previous seasons. Amari Cooper is a start every single week. For CeeDee Lamb, that volume came back last week, which was good to see because we got to see that volume from CeeDee Lamb. If he's not scoring that touchdown, he's got to have that volume. And it looks like we might be getting back to kind of what we saw at the beginning of the season where, yeah, Michael Gallup isn't getting a whole lot of volume. He's going to be very touchdown dependent, but CeeDee Lamb is the guy getting that volume. And CeeDee Lamb is so darn good. He's great for Andy Dalton. He's great for this offense, and he's great for your fantasy lineup as well. Well, what about Cincinnati? Again, this is a Dallas defense that tends to get shredded, and even Lamar Jackson, who has struggled all season long, was able to find some open wide receivers in their game this week and made Miles Boykin look like Tyreek Hill a couple of weeks ago against Tampa Bay. That's how bad this Dallas offense or defense has been this season. So, because of that, we have to go back to Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. I mentioned this in my start and sit show for wide receivers last week. For Tyler Boyd, I mentioned specifically the yards after the catch. For us to be comfortable starting Tyler Boyd on a weekly basis and even T. Higgins at times, they are going to have to put in a game plan that allows them to make those plays after the catch. Now, Brandon Allen, Ryan Finley, going back and forth a little bit, both of these guys, neither of them are going to be able to push the ball down the field. So at that point, what kind of a game plan can you come up with where we can run some slants? Or even with Tyler Boyd's play the other day, it was basically a bubble screen over on the left-hand side of the field, caught the ball, burst up the sideline, just gone. So it's about creating those yards after the catch, and that's exactly what they did. And for Tyler Boyd, yeah, it was only one catch. It was 72 yards and a touchdown. It was enough to make him a start. Hopefully the volume is there on a weekly basis, like it has been for T. Higgins. He's still seeing a decent amount of volume since Burrow went down with that injury. But at this point, he's safe to start, but he's not one of those guys that we're going to see, a really high ceiling every week. That ceiling that we saw at the beginning of the season is probably gone. But I think we continue to see 5 to 6 targets a week, 4 to 5 receptions a week, hopefully in that 50 to 60 yard range, and of course, scoring a touchdown. But both of these guys going up against that soft Dallas defense, we're going to start both of them and hope they both have good fantasy weeks. For Green Bay and Detroit this week, obviously Davante Adams. He's a locked in stone start every single week. The dude has just been fantastic this season. Heck, he has a chance to break some Packers receiving records this year in only 14 games. That's how good he has been this year. Really looking forward to see how he finishes the season. And of course, if he's in your fantasy lineup, you're probably playing for a championship right now. That's how good he's been this season. He's been carrying a lot of teams. So he's a start, obviously. Allen Lazard, he's back. That number 2 option. And when you're going up against the Detroit Lions defense, you basically start your 1 and 2 options against them. Great win last week. Congratulations to them. That's not going to happen this week against Green Bay, though. And we'll talk about Detroit now, because what I saw from the Detroit offense last week, I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And for Detroit, Kenny Golladay, is he going to be back or not? That's what we need to worry about. If Kenny Golladay is back, this offense looks even more dynamic than what it did against a tough Chicago Bears defense. We'll have to continue to monitor that. Hopefully he's back this week. I'm not going to jump on board with it as of yet. Marvin Jones isn't going to be a start for me, because unless Kenny Golladay plays, Jones is going to get Jair Alexander. And I've sat better wide receivers than Marvin Jones this year going up against Jair Alexander. So I'm not going to trust that. Great week for Marvin Jones last week. Obviously, Detroit threw it a lot. They're probably going to throw it a lot again. But Jair Alexander is a top cornerback, maybe the number 1 overall cornerback in the league. But I'm going to go with Danny Amendola here, out of the slot. Green Bay can give up some plays out of the slot. Danny Amendola more than likely will be that guy a majority of the time. Quintez Cephas is another guy that may be in and out of there. Mohamed Sanu. But really, there's going to be a number 1, a number 2, and then it's going to kind of be sprinkled in all over the place. Now, if Kenny Golladay plays, he's not going to get Jair Alexander. So I'll list Marvin Jones as a start. If Kenny Golladay is out, Jones will get Alexander. He'll continue to be a sit. Danny Amendola will be a start. But the one thing I loved about this offense, the hurry-up, aggressive nature of it. They looked like they were attacking defenses last week instead of basically sitting back and waiting for the game to come to them. They were going and getting it, which they needed to do against Chicago, ended up leading to a win. Hurry-up offense, They looked explosive, throwing the ball down the field. They were finally utilizing TJ Hawkinson in all the ways that I've been hoping that they would since the start of last season. Marvin Jones looked good. Matthew Stafford looked excellent. The run game was even producing a little bit with Adrian Peterson in the backfield and Kerryon Johnson. So hopefully they keep that up this week against Green Bay. Tennessee and Jacksonville, and man, we could see some big numbers out of Tennessee this week. Jacksonville, they're being competitive, but make no mistake about it. These two wide receivers from Tennessee right now, really tough to stop them. Corey Davis is a start 100% this week. Another large volume day this past week. His 432 receiving yards when he basically came back and was in the lineup again since week 10 is the most in the NFL, and he is the wide receiver 6 during that time. A.J. Brown is still showing that both him and Davis can produce. Now, A.J. Brown during this time is the wide receiver 13. His fantasy value is a little bit more predicated on, scoring touchdowns. Those big plays, which before the season started, that was what the warning was. But he's still been able to do that with Corey Davis. And Corey Davis kind of functioning as that wide receiver too, having that alpha option A.J. Brown on the other side of him, has allowed Ryan Tannehill to look towards Corey Davis a lot more often and give him more volume because he's not getting the type of coverage that A.J. Brown is getting. Make no doubt about it. A.J. Brown is seeing the top cornerback in these defenses. Corey Davis is not, and Corey Davis has absolutely been able to deliver on that. For Jacksonville, again, if Tennessee is throwing the ball and putting up points, Jacksonville is going to have to throw the ball. And this is a team that just got shredded by Cleveland's wide receivers and Baker Mayfield. So DJ Chark back and healthy. Tennessee just getting lit up by Jarvis Landry, leads me to hope that DJ Chark can do the same thing this week. But I'm also going to go with Collin Johnson because both of them, I believe, can be fantasy viable against this defense this week. Against Rashard Higgins last week, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Jarvis Landry. All three of them were able to have fantastic days. We could see the same thing from Jacksonville. Collin Johnson can be fantasy relevant. He's 14th among wide receivers in receiving yards the last 2 weeks. Mike Glennon is looking his way quite often. And when you get a juicy matchup like this, those looks plus some of the upside can equal a great fantasy day for him. For Kansas City and Miami, Kansas City, Tyreek Hill, he's obviously 100% a start. And last week he had 3 huge plays called back, or he would have had a day that was very similar to his Tampa Bay game a couple of weeks ago. So another monster week incoming this week, I fully believe, going up against Miami. Sammy Watkins is a sit for me right now, but it is interesting. He's got 13 targets since returning from injury over the last couple of weeks. It's not really leading to numbers, though. It's leading to, 4 catches and, about 30 yards, which isn't enough to start him in fantasy. But if he gets a better matchup here in the fantasy playoffs, he could obviously be a start with Tyreek Hill based on that volume he's been getting. But Miami is still a pretty tough defense. They're playing very well this season. Devontae Parker and Jakeem Grant are both going to be starts for me this week. So Tua has not been great for Devontae Parker's upside, but the targets continue to be there. So we're going to continue to play Devontae Parker, but he's more like a low-end wide receiver 2, mid-wide receiver 2 for me. When Ryan Fitzpatrick is in there, he's got wide receiver 1 upside every single day. But with Tua, that upside's limited. For Jakeem Grant, he was 3rd in the team in targets last week, behind Parker, behind Mike Gesicki. They're going to need to throw going up against Kansas City. Kansas City has given up some big plays down the field this year. And also keep in mind, I keep kind of trying to hammer this home about Jakeem Grant. To begin the season, Jakeem Grant and Tua were getting a lot of work together. They were essentially playing in that second string offense. They were working together and getting a lot of reps together while Ryan Fitzpatrick was getting all the work with the ones. Jakeem Grant was not with the ones to begin the season. You had other guys there that were being used instead. Isaiah Ford, Preston Williams, Devontae Parker. Jakeem Grant was seeing a few plays here and there, but he hasn't been a guy that's been asked to step in and fill a big wide receiver role. Now he's being asked to do that. He has a little bit of, that back and forth with Tua. They've had a chance to work together, kind of get on the same page. That camaraderie that you hope to have between a wide receiver and a quarterback, they've got that since they've been running with the 2s for a majority of the season. That could turn into fantasy points this week going up against Kansas City because, as I just said, Kansas City has had a habit of giving up some big plays in the past. Arizona and the New York Giants, and just saying the New York Giants might lead you to believe, hey, we're starting our players against the New York Giants, but don't look now. The Giants are playing a lot better. Okay, over the last 4 games, this Giants team has looked completely different, especially on defense. So for DeAndre Hopkins, we are always starting DeAndre Hopkins. But again, he's going to have James Bradberry this week. And James Bradberry has done more than enough against top wide receivers this season. That doesn't mean sit DeAndre Hopkins. But maybe you see more of a stat line like last week. The targets are still there, 13 targets. Receptions are still there, around 8 receptions like last week. But it's those yards that come down. James Bradberry potentially holding some of those yards down. Only 52 yards last week. That is what I expect to see from DeAndre Hopkins this week. It's more as that type of a line instead of, a 10 receptions for 100 yards and a TD. Hopefully he gets into the end zone this week as well. But, Larry Fitzgerald, he missed last week with COVID. Is he going to be back this week? Christian Kirk, New York, has allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. They held Seattle to 216 passing yards last week. So for me with Christian Kirk, the upside isn't there. He's a sit this week. The upside may not be there from DeAndre Hopkins, but he's always a start. He's always in wide receiver 1 territory, and he'll continue to be this week, just with a lower ceiling. And of course, the New York Giants. Looking at what they've been doing, Arizona's been struggling a little bit as well. So do the New York Giants have a chance to capture another victory here? Yeah, Colt McCoy, not great, obviously, but he's got the job done last week and potentially can get the job done this week as well. We're going to move away from Darius Slayton for right now. We're going to take a step back. Since week 9, he only has 1 game with more than 2 targets and more than 15 yards. So the volume isn't there. The yards are not there. It appears in this offense that Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate have been more of the kind of 1A, 1B option over the last several weeks. And now with Colt McCoy, a guy who's not really known for pushing the ball down the field, they become even more valuable in the sense of what they're trying to do with this offense. They are much better fits with McCoy's style of gameplay. And again, when you're going up against a team like Arizona that's going to throw the ball around a little bit, I think with Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate, we list both of them as starts. Neither of them might be in my top 30 because I don't think the upside is exactly there. Darius Slayton may get Patrick Peterson. Who knows? Maybe it ends up being Sterling Shepard. I'm not 100% sure on that one, who he'll end up covering. It could be one of them. But Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate, one of these guys are probably going to hit. One of them probably won't hit. So I'm going to list them both as starts, and we're going to flip a coin and decide who is going to be the better option in Week 14. Minnesota and Tampa Bay are going to bring together what we anticipated being the best receiving duo, or potentially the best receiving duo in all the league, against a receiving duo that we had, great thoughts for about what was going to end up happening. Well, for Minnesota, there was always a question around how is Justin Jefferson going to perform. People love Justin Jefferson. I like Justin Jefferson. Shortened training camp, not being able to get into, rookie mini camp, all these things. How is he going to adjust? Wide receiver 4. That's how well he is adjusted. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson may be the best wide receiver combo in all of football right now. JJ is at wide receiver 4, Thielen's at wide receiver 6, and he'd be even higher if he had not missed a game a couple of weeks ago due to COVID. Both of them looking great. Over the last 4 weeks, Tampa Bay has allowed 54.98 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That is the most in the NFL. Now, a lot of those points are coming from Tyreek Hill, but that doesn't negate the fact that they still have not looked good over the past several weeks. Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen are in an absolute smash position this week, and both should be started accordingly. And both are probably in the top 10 as well of rankings. Now for Tampa Bay, this is the duo that we thought was going to smash this year. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, you bring in the GOAT. Obviously, he's going to be great for both of them. What's it going to look like? All those things combined. And then all of a sudden you bring in Antonio Brown, and now we've got ourselves a nice little threesome that might be difficult to find out on a weekly basis. For me, though, I think we're starting to see kind of an etching on the wall, a writing on the wall of what this offense will look like. And that's why for me this week, Mike Evans is going to be my Manscaped must start. Mike Evans, absolutely loving what we're seeing from him right now. I was concerned that when this signing first happened with Antonio Brown, that because Tom Brady had been inefficient down the field this year, that he was going to basically leave that game plan for dead and not push the ball down the field to Mike Evans nearly as much and just rely on Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown on those intermediate routes. That hasn't happened, though. That has not happened. Tom Brady, even though he's been inefficient down the field, he's still throwing the ball to Mike Evans. Now, maybe the volume's down a little bit, but the touchdown upside is absolutely there on any given week because Mike Evans, you can't give him double coverage anymore at all because you've got Rob Gronkowski, you've got Godwin, you've got you've got AB, you've got all these weapons. You cannot double team Mike Evans anymore. You can't double team him. 29 targets the last 3 weeks combined. He's got 4 touchdowns as well. Minnesota has allowed some big games this year. They've been a little bit better as of recently, but this year they have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. That for me means a huge incoming week for Mike Evans, a guy that continues to see a lot of targets and is a huge TD upside every single week. And that's why he's going to be my must start, my Manscaped must start. Don't forget, if you head to manscaped.com, use the code word headliners, all capital letters, you're going to get 20% off any of their great products there, plus free shipping. So if you need to take care of, a little bit of business downstairs, Manscaped is just the place to help you do that. Manscaped.com, code word headliners, all capital letters, 20% off and free shipping. So Mike Evans by Manscaped must start. Chris Godwin, obviously a great start as well. We got to start them all. They're going to be throwing more than enough this week, especially going up against this Minnesota offense. For me right now, Godwin is kind of the safest bet. Evans has the highest upside on a weekly basis. And then right now it looks like Gronk is going to continue to be that number 3 target. And then maybe Antonio Brown is going to be that 4th target. But, with Antonio Brown, even though he's going to be the 4th target because of how Minnesota has done against wide receivers, because Minnesota will likely be not really running up the score, but throwing the ball quite a bit as well, running the ball on them. If they get in a situation where they're a negative game script at all, they're going to have to throw, and that just bodes well for all 3 of these wide receivers. The 2020 season got such a weird kickoff as it was. It was a disaster that we had to throw an early retirement party for T.Y. Hilton. I mean, the guy's been such a great fantasy producer for so long. It just sucks to see guys like that leave the league and just be done with their careers. But lo and behold, T.Y. Hilton came out of retirement in the middle of the season. Where'd this guy come from? Look at him back and looking like the T.Y. Hilton of old. Been absolutely on fire the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's good to see it. The problem with Indianapolis, there's only enough volume for one wide receiver. So if you're going to start T.Y. Hilton, you're not going to be able to start Michael Pittman. If you're going to start Michael Pittman, you're not going to be able to start T.Y. Hilton. For me this week, though, we are going to start T.Y. Hilton. I'm thinking Phillip Rivers is just feeling that connection, and we'll continue to roll with it. And hopefully that continues to happen. Now, the reason why we can only start one of these wide receivers is because Phillip checkdown Rivers continues to look at Nyheim Hines, Jonathan Taylor, all of 3 of his tight ends there. They're just going that way so often, pushing so much volume that way that there's just not enough left over for the wide receivers to put together enough volume. If a couple of them can score, that's great, but that's probably not likely to happen because Rivers isn't looking their way often enough. So for their opponents this week, Las Vegas. Yeah, Henry Ruggs, that big play at the end of last week, but one big play doesn't change his stance on. Henry Ruggs has been wildly inconsistent this season and just has not been what a lot of fantasy owners hope that he might be. But Nelson Aguilar still saw 11 targets last week. And if Josh Jacobs is out again this week, going up against an Indianapolis team that has been playing better on offense, they're going to have to throw the ball quite a bit again. And Nelson Aguilar, if he continues to get 11 targets, I'll buy into him as a wide receiver every single week. A wide receiver 3, every single week. And that's what I'll buy into him again this week. Around that wide receiver 3 area. Still a start for me, though, because the volume has been there for him to be a fantasy contributor. We'll continue to debate whether or not the Jets actually threw that game last week against Las Vegas. But one thing is for certain, they're not going to have to throw the game against Seattle because Seattle's going to be looking for blood this week. Coming off that loss last week, they are going to want to put it on the Jets, put it on early, put it on often. So because of that, Brashad Perriman, Jamison Crowder are going to be starts for me this week. We know the Seahawks can give up points in bunches, right? We've seen it all season long. The defense has been a little bit inconsistent. It's looked decent at times. Other times it gets absolutely shredded in the secondary. For Jamison Crowder, I'm going to list him as a start, but I just want to put this note on it for everybody, okay? A lot of people last week, Jamison Crowder's back, so excited, that's great. And trust me, is a guy that pushed Jamison Crowder this season and was so excited to see him in this offense because of the volume he got with Sam Darnold last week. and the weapons that they added on the outside with Perryman and Mims, just pump the brakes a little bit. He scored 2 touchdowns last week, but we got to be careful because his fantasy points earlier in the year were based on volume. I mean, he had double-digit targets in all 4 of his first 4 games of the season. That's not what happened last week, and that's not what has been happening with Jamison Crowder. That volume that we saw to start the beginning of the year is gone. It's not there anymore. Mims and Perryman are both back and both healthy, something that they were not at the beginning of the season. So the hope for Crowder is yes, you start him, but he's not going to have 2 touchdown upside every single week. Don't expect that out of him. So while I'm excited to see, yes, he played much better last week, I'm asking you all to pump the brakes and not necessarily expect a return to that wide receiver 1 status that we saw earlier in the season because he had so much volume. Now, for Seattle, we already know what's happening with Seattle, right? DK is human. We didn't think that. All of a sudden, DK Metcalf shows up. He is human. He has a game where he absolutely looks human last week, but it's just a blip on the radar. Still a top option. Last week, Tyler Lockett, 9 targets, and he's actually had 9 targets in 3 of his last 4 games. So hopefully that type of volume, that consistency we see in the targets continues to happen because it's not going to be too long before he has another huge game if he's still seeing 9 targets per week. However, he left last week with a possible concussion. If he is ready and raring to go, we start him. If not, obviously it's a sit. And actually David Moore, will become a start in his place. We got to monitor Tyler Lockett throughout the week. And if he ends up being a sit because he's out with a concussion, then we'll go ahead and flip to David Moore. But the 9 targets in 3 of the last 4 games is great to see from Tyler Lockett. You know, I could continue to throw out that overused joke like I did earlier about T.Y. Hilton where, players are retiring early. That's obviously a funny joke here and there. I'm not going to do it again with Justin Herbert, though. I could say, it's so awful that he retired at such a young age. But let's just face it. The Chargers had an awful game last week, and I don't think that's going to continue to happen. A lot of people are saying, we've had Justin Herbert be so solid for so long. All of a sudden he has a bad game, and everyone tries to jump off the bandwagon. I don't get it. Going up against Atlanta this week, they're not the pushover that they were at the beginning of the season, but they're not a stellar defense either. They're not going up against Pittsburgh or Baltimore here. This is an Atlanta team that's still going to give up some points and still going to give up some options. But let's talk about Atlanta first. Julio, Calvin Ridley, both of them are going to be starts. Can we get through a week where we're not asking the question, is Julio Jones going to play or not? If he plays, you start him. I kind of said the same thing on the live show last week. People are like, do you start Julio Jones? Yeah, you start Julio Jones. I think I answered a couple of questions saying, yeah, play Justin Jefferson over Julio Jones, which ended up working out just fine. But I also mentioned, we've seen it before. If Julio Jones plays, you play him because very rarely is he ever a decoy. So hopefully we can get through a week where we don't have to sit around, worrying about an injury with Julio Jones. That's asking for a lot, though. Calvin Ridley, they both had 10 targets last week, and the run game could end up being weak this week as well. Listed Ito Smith as a start. Todd Gurley dealing with a knee injury, or not as a start. Listed Ito Smith as a pickup on the waiver wire show. Todd Gurley dealing with a knee injury. Could be throwing the ball quite a bit this week. And again, going up against a Chargers offense that has been very good this season. And hopefully they bounce back. And I think they will. Keenan Allen, he's been so good with Herbert. We're going to continue to roll him out. Again, a ton of targets last week. He's the number 1 option. He's the guy that Herbert is looking for first and foremost every single play. Mike Williams, I just can't get back on board with Mike Williams. He saw a decent amount of volume last week, but they were forced to throw the entire time being down. How many points again? Was that 45-0? So it's not going to be there on a weekly basis, especially going up against a defense that they're actually going to be able to score on. They're not necessarily going to have to throw the ball so much. They're going to be able to run the ball against Atlanta a little bit more this week, and I expect them to do so. So that volume for Mike Williams with Austin Eckler being back, it just hasn't been there for him. So for me, he's back to being a sit for now. Who would have thought at the beginning of the 2020 season that Week 14 would have been the matchup of Taysom Hill and Jalen Hurts and not Drew Brees and Carson Wentz? 2020 for you. That's just how it's been. For the New Orleans Saints, though, Michael Thomas, he's going to be a start. For as bad as Philadelphia has been on offense this year, they've actually been pretty good on defense, which kind of gets overlooked because of how inconsistent the offense has been. If they were able to put up points, they should be running away with the East right now. That's how good the defense has been. But Michael Thomas, he's still a start. The thing is, with Emmanuel Sanders and Traquan Smith, I'm going to walk away from those two right now and list them as sits, just because Michael Thomas, again, Taysom Hill's been looking his way quite a bit. But with this Philly defense, they could give Hill some troubles through the air. And with their pass rush, the one thing that I'm concerned about is that Taysom Hill is going to take off a lot this week. If he even gets a sense that Philadelphia is getting into the backfield, boom, down the field, taking off, running with his legs, going. That's the one thing I'm worried about is Taysom Hill's not going to do a good job of staying in the pocket this week and actually throwing the ball. Now, he might be a start because, again, his upside with him running on the ground is great. But as far as passing through the air, I mean, he's had 2 really good games against Atlanta. But again, an Atlanta defense that just, hasn't been great at all this season. They've been a little bit better, but they haven't been great. So when you're going up against a defense like Philadelphia that has been good on defense at times this season and has been a lot better than these Atlanta teams, they can get into the backfield. They can cause some pressure. That could lead Taysom Hill to take off running and be on the move a lot more often than not, which leads to a lot lower upside for the wide receivers. For Philadelphia, for the wide receivers, Alshon Jeffrey, we're not going with him. Travis Fulgham, he was a benefit of volume earlier in the season. That was it. He's not a guy right now that we're waiting on. Greg Ward and Jalen Reagor are both going to be starts for me this week. Why? They're going to have to throw the ball. I mean, they're going to have to. There's no exception. New Orleans is going to put up some points. They're going to keep the ball as far as running it. When Philadelphia has it, they're going to throw. My hope is with Jalen Hurts is that he does enough this week, or they do enough with the game plan to kind of open some things up. What is there to lose? You got to see what you got with Jalen Hurts. Don't throw him out there and just run the football a whole lot. See what you have with this guy. Jalen Reagor, both of these, Ward and Reagor are going to be ranked very, very, very low. And quite honestly, for those of you out there that are considering playing them, you've probably got worse, problems on your hand than looking at Greg Ward and Jalen Reagor. So by no means am I listing these guys as must starts. They're not going to be in my top 30, but both of them have an opportunity for 10 fantasy points this week because of how much they're going to be throwing. For Jalen Reagor, the one thing that I see with Reagor is the ability to move him in and out of the slot a little bit, some of these intermediate routes, to do some different things with him around the field to set up some high percentage completion plays for Jalen Hurts. That's what they're going to need to do to get started. That's where Jalen Reagor's athleticism and ability after the catch really could help Jalen Hurts. That's why I like him. For Greg Ward, Hurts was looking his way quite a bit last week when he came in. He had that touchdown later in the game, but the big thing for both Ward and Reagor is likely Jeffrey. When Alshon Jeffrey's on the field, he's going to be facing Marshawn Lattimore. That would be excellent for both Greg Ward and Jalen Reagor and their potential fantasy output this week. Don't look now, but Washington wants a shot at the playoffs, and they're looking a lot better. Great win over Pittsburgh last week, and a much better opponent this week for the passing game in San Francisco. Terry McLaurin, he's going to bounce back this week. Bad game last week against Pittsburgh. That's all right. Still one of the more consistent wide receivers in terms of floor that the league has right now. Expect to bounce back. Richard Sherman, I'm not worried about him trying to contain Terry McLaurin. For the rest of the guys, though, it's splitting hairs. It could be one guy, it could be another guy any given week. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just whoever's getting more open, the most during that game. So Terry McLaurin for Washington will continue to be the only start for me. For San Francisco, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. Now, last week's game, it led to a lot of negative game script, which really helped Samuel and Ayuk. And this week, going up against Washington, it's still going to be a tough matchup, but they both looked good together last week. It could be a lot of the same thing with negative game script, and if it is, for Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, both of those guys are going to get more than enough volume. One other thing that I want to mention about Washington that I forgot to mention is probably no Antonio Gibson this week, which could lead to some extra targets, which would be absolutely great for Terry McLaurin. He could probably be the main benefactor from that. Pittsburgh suffers their first loss to Washington last week, and now they got to turn around on Sunday Night Football, and they got to go up against a Buffalo team that on primetime television is going to want to stick it to them. So they better get ready to go heading into Buffalo this week. Juju, Deontay Chase, all of them are going to be starts this week. Deontay Johnson, ignore the drops. We're still playing him. Yeah, the drops are bad right now, but we're still playing him. The upside's too great every single week. And really, Ben continues to target him like the wide receiver one on that team. Juju Smith-Schuster, last week, 10 targets, 7 catches. Huge day, right? 28 yards. Who has 7 catches and only goes for 28 yards, Juju? Come on now. Come on. They'll bounce back this week. Juju's still seeing plenty of volume. The one concern on this team, though, is Chase Claypool. Only 60% of the snaps last week, especially in a close game. James Washington was that wide receiver 3 last week for some reason, and I don't know why. I'm going to continue to look at it, keep an eye on it. We're still going to start Chase Claypool, but let's hope that this isn't leading up to more negative things for Chase Claypool, because if his snap percentages are dropping down into the 60s all of a sudden, we're no longer starting all 3 of these wide receivers. Another team we are starting 3 wide receivers from is Buffalo. Stephon Diggs. Obviously, we continue to play him. Cole, when John Brown is out, you put me in your lineup, Beasley. That's what we're going to call him from now on. A monster first half, a monster game last week. Cole the Beazles, great game. And then, of course, Gabriel Davis. You know, I continue to say it. He was my Manscaped must-add last week. I had him listed as a start. I told you, the dude, over the last couple of games, he starts 70 yards and a touchdown. What did he have last week? 68 yards and a touchdown. So Gabriel Davis continues to be a start for me because he's got touchdown upside every single week, and expect a whole lot of throwing in this game, and let's bet on the over. You think Cleveland's ready to make a statement? Monday Night Football, they're in the thick of the playoff race. Baltimore's coming off a win. Cleveland has the opportunity to put it to Baltimore and really secure a wild card spot moving forward. That's what they need to do. They got to stick it to Baltimore this week, and Cleveland is going to come in ready to play. And Baltimore's offense better be ready to roll, because they're going to have to put up some points. They're going to have to look like how they did against Dallas. And it was encouraging to see that. Okay, Miles Boykin obviously had that touchdown there. Marquise Brown, good to see him, getting into the game plan again. But that's Dallas. It's a soft defense. It's not the same thing with Cleveland. Cleveland's had their fair share of struggles this year, but they're better, okay? It's the pass rush that could make things interesting for Lamar Jackson. It could make him wildly inaccurate. It can make him wildly inefficient. Yep, they're going to have to throw the ball, but I expect them to say, man, we got to attack this team on the ground. We got to run, and hopefully it opens up the passing game. So even though I missed on Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin last week, I don't care. I'm going back to them as sits. Is Willie Snead going to be back from the COVID list? Is Des Bryant really done? Getting that inconclusive test, getting pulled off the field, didn't get ready to face Dallas. Obviously went on that tirade on Twitter. Is he going to actually come back or not? We'll monitor those things throughout the week. For Cleveland, Jarvis Landry, wide receiver for the last 2 weeks, back-to-back scores, 21 targets, 16 receptions. He's going to be a start for me. Higgins and Donovan Peoples-Jones, for those two right now, it's just a little... There's nothing there that spells consistency for me. So until I see some more consistent performances, Higgins would be the next start. Peoples-Jones would be a start after that. This is not a team that you're going to start 3, though, because like I said, against Baltimore, I think the game plan this week is going to be, hey, we got to run the football. We got to attack with Nick Chubb. We got to attack with Kareem Hunt. We do that. We keep the ball in our hands as long as possible. Keep it away from Lamar Jackson, and we got to win this week. There you have it, Headliner Nation, my start and sit analysis for Week 14 of the NFL season. Do me a favor down below, hit that like button if you appreciate the content. And as always, if you got questions about somebody listed in the show, somebody maybe you didn't hear enough about or you got questions on, leave those down in the comments. And if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button, become a part of Headliner Nation today. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning into this episode. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.